Good morning, good evening, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you may be doing. We wish to welcome you to the Silverlight Show. The Silverlight shines to illuminate that which lies hidden in darkness. For those of you listening in on the Life Online Radio Network, we welcome you in. For those of you listening on YouTube, we welcome you in. A shout out to our sponsor, Affinity Writing and Editing Services at Affinity WES on Facebook and on Twitter for their extensive help with our show to this very day. Now, when I talk about writing and editing services, you might disbelieve my claim. You might say that you are skeptical. And this is one of the things I want to go over today. Not just skepticism, but the general attitude of the scientific community towards the paranormal. Modern skepticism is a very interesting thing. It's kind of evolved from what it was. Once upon a time, it meant you have to show me proof for me to believe you. And that is an admirable thing. However, in the modern sense, a skeptic has come to mean I will not believe you no matter what. This creates a pig-headedness where two people are just going to ram at each other over and over, butt their heads together, smack each other, and neither one is ever going to move their position. This is not the goal of skepticism. Skepticism is a valuable tool. It helps you evaluate the data before you and figure out what is going on. That way you can make a rational, informed decision. Now I bring this up because, the past year or so, aside from the major public concern, shall we call it, there have been a number of very interesting anomalies. The monolith, as it was dubbed, the steel structure that appeared in Utah, then disappeared, and another one, or perhaps the same one, appeared in Romania, is very interesting indeed. The part that makes me skeptical is that I find it very interesting that satellite photos show it was there since 2016. So it sat around for 4 years with nobody noticing it. It's 2020. But keep in mind, there are millions, if not billions, of acres of state parks, mountainsides, inaccessible areas, all sorts of things humans can't get into or don't monitor regularly. Google Maps exists, but they don't map every single bay and every single square inch. They do the best they can with the technology that they have. But there's no substitute for reconnaissance on the ground. Pair of eyes with a pair of legs, able to see something and say, yes, it is there, no, it is not there. Now the skeptics are saying, oh, it's man-made because it had rivets on it, it had screws on it. Okay, that sounds fair enough to me, and more than likely, I'm willing to believe it is man-made. I don't know how it teleported away from Utah or wound up in Romania, but it managed, and I do say teleported. The reason why I'm saying that is because it was there for 4 years, it got discovered recently, and while it was under surveillance, while people were watching it, going out to it daily, someone had a plan to move a large metal structure from the middle of a national park in the middle of the night without being observed, without leaving tracks, without anything. And whether the Romanian one is a second one, or whether it's the same one, which makes it more ridiculous because that would mean they would have had to steal it from Utah, ship it to Romania by rocket apparently, and set it up again with nobody noticing. So, simply put, I think there's two of them. What would be the purpose for these monoliths? There could be any number of purposes. Right now, the favorite theory is that an artist put them up. I think, perhaps, somebody with a lot of money and a lot of time wanted there to be more than one of them. It's more logical in my skeptical mind to say there were two of them, and we only have just discovered them because, again, the Google Maps people, the people that snoop around, that click on random grid squares and zoom in to the infinite detail to see what they can find. That is a relatively modern phenomenon. And even they haven't had a chance to look everywhere yet. But like I said, the logistics of tearing it out of a Utah park in the middle of the night are difficult enough. Assuming the government didn't do it, which I don't see any reason for them to do it. But like I said, for you to get that out of Utah in the middle of the night and get it to Europe and set it up in Romania, not likely. Whereas the structure itself seems simple enough that you could send plans to your friend in Romania or go there on a separate business trip, pick up the materials and bang it together. Now, being a skeptic, I cannot rule out other possibilities. And this is where I really break ranks with modern skeptics. Because lack of evidence does not constitute proof. Just because I can't prove what happened, just because I can't prove the two are separate, doesn't mean they're the same thing. It doesn't mean anything. All it means is something happened, and that's the only thing we can prove. It was in Utah, and overnight it disappeared. It has now been discovered in Romania. Those are the facts we are given. It's very difficult to pull any truth out of those few statements. There's an important scientific term called falsifiability. And what it says is that if you can't make an absolute statement, your statement is false. So for example, I can't say all swans are white because there do exist swans of different colors. So by saying all swans are white, I'm automatically opening myself up for criticism. Just simply because other swans exist. Whether I know about them or not is not the question. Whether you have a photo of them right now or not is not the question. And indeed, on the internet, both statements would find their supporters. You could put a picture of a rock on the internet, a plain old rock, a little bit of sandstone, granite, what have you. And people are going to argue over that rock, whether it's a good rock, whether it's a bad rock, whatever it is, and neither side is going to budge because they're both trying to be skeptical. But nobody is worried about falsifiability. This is the problem with the modern world. We have descended into an era where falsifiability has, while it is being treated as an objective, it's not being done. If you read the introductions to a lot of books, you're going to find that the author tells you out in front that they have a certain point of view. And this is ultimately practical when it comes to academic subjects. If I was going to write another economic paper, which I hope to never do again, but that's another story, I would have to begin in my introduction telling my professor or whoever is guiding me, saying I'm coming from the standpoint of Marxism. Now, don't take it personally. A lot of you are going to hit that dislike button or tune out right now. I'm not a Marxist. I've said before, I'm apolitical, I'm asocial. That's not true, I do socialize. Apolitical and a-economic. I think there needs to be a new system made up for everybody, but I haven't come up with something fair yet. Good news, the reboot of capitalism is coming up, so you don't need to worry, aside from the fact that all the bad guys are signed up for it. Back to what we were talking about. Everybody has their bias. Everybody has a set of life experiences that they grew up with and are important and integral to their character. I was born in a medium-sized, let's call it a medium-sized town that became a mid-sized city. It's not the biggest city, not the smallest, it's somewhere in the middle. I was fortunate enough to be raised around a diverse set of people. And because of that, when I see the news coming out and saying, this person has come out as transgender, this person married an Indian girl. This person married whatever the heck it is, doesn't bother me. Why? Because the introduction to my life is that multiculturalism happens. Not a problem for me. Hey, the girl next door is dating an alien. Okay, that's a little bit unusual. I didn't know aliens were here, but that's good for her. And this is where scientists have started to fail. There's this corruptive cycle that is in modern scientific thought, where skepticism, not classical skepticism, which was an idea of denying yourself earthly pleasures in the pursuit of knowledge, and also the idea of discussing something until you'd found the truth. Socrates was actually executed for his skepticism because he was teaching the youth of Athens to ask questions. And the complaint about him was, while he was teaching them to ask questions, the elders, people like him, were perceiving it as though the children were standing up and being disrespectful to their parents. Imagine that. Your father, your mother, whoever it is, tells you something, you ask why. Like every kid has, probably since language has been developed, we do it this way. Why? Children ask this question all the time. You're never going to get away from that why. Whether it be religious, whether it be scientific, whether it be political, the why is almost always the most important question. It isn't sufficient to understand that an Austrian with a horrible mustache managed to terrorize most of the world. The question is why and how. You need to question these things. Now, back in Socrates' day, they managed to nail him on that charge, not just because he was teaching people to be disrespectful and not honoring their children's wishes, but because he was asking questions, they could accuse him of making innovations in religion. What that means is, to an Athenian, it was as though he was undermining the bedrock of the gods themselves. And that is why Socrates had to take his famous drink of hemlock and slide away to the underworld. This Puritan mentality towards what is known has never been forgotten. Now, let me preface the rest of this by saying I am not against the scientific method. The scientific method is invaluable. It shows us the Earth is a globe. It shows us the Earth circles the sun. Or more accurately, they both circle a center of gravity. That the two of them are spinning through the galaxy. The galaxy is moving towards the Andromeda galaxy, where they'll collide in about 3 billion years. If anybody's listening to this about that point, good for you. Let us know how it works out. Although by then the sun will be nearly burnt out, and if there are any survivors of the human race, they'll be on other stars. Not important, but it's just something to think about. The next 3-4 billion years, even the galaxy you know will no longer exist. The Earth probably still will. The sun still will. Both of them won't have much life left in it. That's not skepticism. That's the latest modeling that astronomers have done. And that right now, that is the best proof we have. This gets back into my whole skepticism and falsifiable thing, because that's what astronomers do. They model. We don't have the ability to send the Starship Enterprise out to the local group and map things out. We have telescopes on the ground, but we do have the advantage of being rather clever at math. I don't know if we're the world's best at it, or, the universe looks down on us as the kids in that separate class that the teacher always looks as though she smoked 6 packs of cigarettes and drank 5 cups of coffee before she came into work. We just know that we can calculate where things will be. And we're pretty darn good at it. We're not exact, and our detection system is not perfect. For example, these asteroids that show up in the news every so often, Apophis, that's supposed to hit us in 2035, and they keep revising the prediction. But the important thing is, they didn't just go ahead and say it's going to hit in 2035. They're monitoring it. They're watching it. It's in their minds, and they're trying to come up with answers. But no one has said whether it's going to hit or not, because they don't have the model. Everything is still falsifiable. Something can change. And this is the problem with our current scientific community. They like to think we've already mapped all the sciences, mapped all the corners of the earth. We know everything. And the truth is, we're very far from knowing anything. Nanotechnology, that for most people in the world was first talked about on Star Trek The Next Generation, or perhaps if you read Isaac Asimov or one of those more eclectic science fiction authors, was nothing but a dream 20 years ago. Nowadays, we're actually at the point where we can build molecules one by one. In the 1980s, 1970s, people would have thought you were mad, or would have thought that'll be wonderful in 100 years, but we can't do that now. As a matter of fact, going back to Star Trek, which, believe it or not, is not my favorite science fiction series, but is wildly popular, so I use it. In Star Trek, in the movies, where they could have displayed anything they wanted, they had computers that only looked slightly more advances than the Ataris and Commodore 64s that were widespread at the point. Because they didn't believe computers were going to keep going on the way they were. Well, surprise, here we are in 2020 with not only virtual reality, but augmented reality. What is augmented reality? Well, that is a currently evolving technology. The best example probably would be Pokemon Go, where you wander around the city and you capture Pokemon, little pocket monsters, and do battle, all with the help of your handy dandy phone. Augmented reality is only going to become more and more of a thing. Look at the Oculus Rift, which is a pair of 3D goggles that goes over your face. And you can turn your house into a virtual reality, whatever you want it to be. Whether you want to play a game, whether you want to hang out with your friends. It's expensive, but it works. Back in 2014 and 2015, Google tried to do the same thing with Google Glass, which was supposed to be a pair of glasses you put on your face, you could activate, and imagine that. Anybody who wears glasses could now be playing a video game while they're sitting in those long, boring meetings. Almost happened. The power supply issue hit it. But the important thing is, we already know it is possible. The only limitation right now is power. And there are more and more powerful batteries coming online. Just they haven't reached the production capacity to be made inexpensive just yet. That's still happening. The funny part, though, is, so we look at all this wonderful technology that has all come up in the last 15, 20, 25, 50, let's take it right back to 80 years. Because the Industrial Revolution that happened after World War II was just as important as an information revolution that is going on now. After World War II, they had basic computers. Now, when I'm talking basic, they couldn't even stand up to your cell phone. They would just be burnt out in seconds and they wouldn't have a chance. And that's okay. There's no problem with humans developing technology because those first computers gave rise to the ones that guided Apollo to the moon. And the ones that guided Apollo to the moon eventually came home in Atari and Commodore 64 and IBM. One thing always leads to another. The difficulty we have is the scientists who were active in the 40s, 50s, and 60s mostly were atheistic. They had abandoned religion because the religion they had grown up with was pretty restrictive. And this is nothing against religion. Religion is awesome for the most part. The only time you get bad religions is when people pervert something into a cult, and I don't hold that against any religion in particular. Religions don't all preach love and joy as some people would have you believe, but they do preach dedication to something higher than yourself, that there's more than just your flesh and blood in your body. Pay attention, that will come back again. You're not just flesh and bones, you are something higher, trapped inside a flesh body. Back to scientific progress, though. We have come so far. It's tough for me to really document what's happened even over the past 30 years. So what I'm going to simply do is say we took a major turn in 1991. What's so special about 1991? The Iraq War happened, yes, but that wasn't the thing that spurred us on technologically. The important thing that happened was the Soviet Union fell. Now, the reason that is important is because in the Western world, we compartmentalize. What that means is if you decide tomorrow you're going to become the world's premier expert on nuclear physics, you're going to spend your time studying the proton. Not the neutron, not the electron, nothing else, the proton. You're going to write your papers on the proton. You will be the expert on the proton. You'll know its spin, you'll know its mass, you'll know its density, you'll know exactly what it's going to do at any given time or for. After that, you can read other people's work and understand the neutron, the electron, etc. But your expertise is on the photon. This is partially a result of the German education system. When Project Paperclip happened and we brought the former Nazi scientists over, they brought their educational system over. And it was a decent fit because the Germans and the English have a long shared history together, for better or for worse. But it was very much sit down, shut up, learn this, and that will be what you work with. Not very conducive to open inquiry. And again, this is where skepticism mutated into the idea that we have today, where being a skeptic means disbelieving everything. But when the Soviet Union fell, the Russians had a completely different idea. They had their own Project Paperclip. Make no mistake about it. Their rockets are just as German as our rockets were. But the difference is, the Russians brought them in to teach their scientists what they knew, and then found other things for them to do. And that was true in their jet program, that was true in their rocket program, and that was true with every scientific endeavor that Stalin managed to get his hands on. I think this system was dramatically superior because it wound up with the Russians being the first to put men in space, the first to do all sorts of things, the first to put really massive space stations up there. The Americans beat them to the moon, absolutely, but the Russians had the same plans on the table. And it was only American fanaticism of dedicating themselves to that one singular goal that made them achieve it. The Russians were generalists, which means you didn't just study that one proton, you studied the whole atom. You learned how the whole system works together. And because of that, they developed some very, very interesting technology. Right now, the United States is developing lasers to go on board not just its battleships, but they're also developing them for the F-35 and F-22 fighters. The idea being that these lasers would be able to shoot down missiles that are coming in to shoot down the aircraft. Fantastic, but the Russians had a simplified system of this in the 1980s. They had a small tracked vehicle with what I'm going to call a strange-looking aperture on it, and it was basically a system of 16 chemical lasers that would lock on and destroy incoming ordnance. This is one of those things that have been lost to time. Now, this is not falsifiable. I can show you the records that the Soviets did, in fact, have this laser tank. I've had pictures of it on the internet before, and it's one of those little-known vehicles. And the reason that is is because they chose not to continue doing it. It was more expensive than it was worth, and the Americans had similar technology, so it wasn't really worth developing any further. It didn't really give them a battlefield advantage in the Russian world. The Soviet world, yes. The Russian world, no. But imagine that in the 1980s, they were fielding a battlefield laser that we are still trying to implement in 2020. The Russians were known for not having very highly advanced computers compared to the United States and the Western world. Japan and the United States and the United Kingdom were playing Nintendo games, while the Russians had this little Dandy, I believe the name of the system is called, which is not a bad ripoff, but at the same token, it's a copy. It is a Nintendo copy with Russian games on it. That just shows how innovative the Russians were. They didn't have the budget the United States did. They didn't have the time where there was, well, maybe they had the resources, but they were more expensive for the USSR to collect. So their scientists had to come up with different scientific philosophies, different ideas, different mindsets, just to be able to do what they could do. A Russian in the USSR actually invented stealth. He was the first one to come up with the paper to describe the angles, all the little things that we've used from the SR-71 to the new B-21 that's coming out to make them stealthy. But the Russians looked at it, the Soviets, there's a difference between a Soviet and a Russian. The Soviets looked at it and said it was too complicated. And for that time, for what they had, they were 100% right. It was complicated. It took the United States years of development in Area 51 just to get the darn thing flying. And all their prototypes were destroyed in accidents. And eventually the F-117 came along. A small little fighter, well, not even a fighter, small little aircraft that could drop bombs and not be detected. All because one person's discarded idea became another person's treasure. So how many ideas are we losing out every single day simply because our scientific establishment has the mentality that if it doesn't fit within our reality, it doesn't exist? And the answer is lots. You start a scientific paper by ruling out certain things. Now, it's not only just defining your terms where you say, when I mean skepticism, I mean I'm going to be open-minded, but let the evidence show me where it goes. This is not used in scientific papers. Skepticism means if it doesn't fit the hypothesis, I've probably gotten rid of the data. Falsifiability. Can you make an absolute statement? And in mathematics, it is actually relatively easy to come up with a falsifiable statement and to make it non-falsifiable. You can always prove x equals y through any number of means. As anybody who took algebra and equations in school knows, x can equal anything. So we are sitting in a scientific establishment that says only what we say exists, while at the same token, our mathematics can prove anything we want it to prove. It's very disconcerting and disturbing. The bullet point to take out of this is that our scientific system is schizophrenic. It's of two heads, and it wants to get rid of anything it can't deal with. This is why we have the paranormal, the parapsychological, and pseudoscience. Now, pseudoscience gets into a lot of strange ideas. I pick on flat earthers because I've been around the globe. I've physically seen it with my own eyes. So yeah, I can personally say with absolute certainty, yes, the world is round and I have seen it. They don't see it. And you know what? There could be evidence I am missing, and for some reason, everybody in every government in the world, from the Soviet Union and the United States, right through the present, are all lying to me. Now, I like a conspiracy theory, but that one's a little too hard to swallow. That being said, if I am going to be a true skeptic, my mind should be open. I can't just dismiss it. I listen to it. Now, so far, none of them has presented a convincing argument to me. As a matter of fact, some of them have come up with some very interesting experiments. One of them was using a parking lot gate to show how the Earth moved around the solar system. And I was thinking, that's actually a great idea for an experiment. Did I agree with his conclusion? Absolutely not. But at the same token, I liked the way he thought. And in another situation, I might be able to use that. A scientist who subscribes to a modern Western skeptical view would just dismiss the whole thing. That's not the way science works. If somebody shows you something that works, you should pay attention. Just because you can't explain it is no reason to ignore it. And this is why we get into such trouble with the paranormal. We don't have perfect evidence in the paranormal. We actually have a lot of questions with the paranormal. But that's because science is a self-fulfilling paradigm. By rejecting evidence and saying, oh, we already know there's no such things as ghosts or Bigfoot and stuff like that, so your UFO pictures can't exist. No, that's wrong. That's not the way skepticism works. Skepticism is about, oh, you have new evidence. Well, let's look at it. The monolith, once again. There was evidence it was there. I didn't personally witness it, but enough people witnessed it. There's something there. Don't know what. Don't even have an idea how to begin unraveling that mystery. But the same token, something was there. Something physically put that monolith there, and one in Romania. The odds of them not being related are there, but still, something happened. Ghosts. How many people go on ghost hunts? I think I've made fun of them on this show before, but there are some really, really good ghost hunting teams. Spooky South Coast, for example, goes out of their way to try and make the experience as legitimate as possible. And shout out to Tim if he happens to ever listen to this show. I think he is a wonderful person and very interesting to listen to. Going back to our evidence spectrum, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call him. We can mostly rule out Bigfoot because we don't see Bigfoot. At the same token, you generally don't see a turkey in a city unless it's in a freezer. You generally don't see chickens unless they're in a coop. But we know chickens exist, we know turkeys exist, and there can be wild populations of deer, elk, and even human beings that are still undiscovered. We know in the Amazon there's definitely human beings that have never been discovered. It's possible there's a tribe somewhere out there in the great forests of the northwest of North America, or even around the poles, that have never been contacted. This would be very difficult, but it's still possible. And if a tribe of humans could live out there, then a tribe of animals could absolutely live out there. Animals are smarter than we give them credit for. Everyday science is always posting results. Oh, dogs are smarter than we thought. Cats were smarter than we thought. They use a form of language we didn't think they had before. But anyone who's ever had a dog or a cat knows that. We know how smart they are. There's nothing strange and new about this. It's just our science didn't allow for it until somebody was allowed to ask the right question. And this is a major, major, major point. I have had... how am I going to phrase this? I've had friends that have gone all the way to PhD. And when you're going through your master's, you don't really get to pick what you're going to write your topic on. Unless you have something incredibly mind-blowing, they assign a topic to you. A very, very good friend of mine was actually assigned, for those of you who remember the video game Second Life, where you lived in a virtual reality and you did virtual things, that was what it was. But for those of you who are either too old or too young or never played it, just think of it as any online game like World of Warcraft, RuneScape, Fortnite, PlayerUnknown Battlegrounds, whatever it is. Something where you're interacting in a virtual world. And she was asked to do a psychological survey of all the players who played those particular games. She didn't want to do it. She's not a game player. She's very good at psychiatric surveys, but she didn't really know the gamer mentality. So in a way, it was good for her to look at it so that she could get a better idea of the psychological profile of nerds like us. And on the other hand, she would have probably rather have done anything she wanted. My friend is not alone. Doctorates tend to do research on what they like, but it still has to be approved by an ethics board, by all sorts of individual organizations, just so that they can get the funding to do it. And you'd be surprised what gets funding. They won't fund a study on UFOs, Sasquatch, ghosts, but they will fund a study to go in and observe the social relationships in a strip club. They will fund people to go in and observe relationships between regulars and a bar. These are real papers that were published. So we have time to do that, to literally send people into what some people would consider sinful places with government allocated university money in their pocket so that they can pay for services. Because of course, as a scientist, you're supposed to be observing, and to observe, you have to be invisible. You have to be transparent. You're supposed to be a mirror through which you can show the inner workings. Now, you can't be a mirror if you block any light off from that subject. Again, UFOs, ghosts, Bigfoot, missing monoliths, whatever you have. If you go in front of a university board right now and say, hey, I have this great idea. I want to study UFOs and prove that they are multidimensional craft. They're going to shoot you down because they're going to say, we haven't proved multidimensionality yet, so you can't use that. What you have is not falsifiable because it can't be proven right and it can't be proven wrong. Okay. Well, what about if I prove that UFOs are... No, we don't have any evidence UFOs exist. Okay, what if I study reports of UFOs? Okay, you can do that. What are you going to use it for? Well, I'm going to use them to prove UFOs exist. Nope, you can't prove the UFOs exist. Well, I'm going to study the psychological profile of people who report UFOs. Now, after all that, you suddenly have something that they'll let you write a paper on. You can't prove the UFO. You can only prove the common experience. Yes, it is as ludicrous as I'm making it sound, and I'm doing that on purpose. Can you imagine if you're going to do a scientific study on air? We can't see it, we can't feel it, but we know it exists. Now, science already accepts the existence of air, so it's not quite so big of a struggle. But imagine you were starting off right now, and you are saying, I'm going to show what we are breathing. Nonsense. We're just breathing because it's part of our body's natural rhythm. And this was actually believed in the 1800s. They also believed we breathed in ether. It took a while to figure out what the chemical was that we were actually using to live on. And that's why I think our modern skeptical attitude of, you have to prove it to me before I'll believe it, is harmful. There's going to be a lot of scientific things that come out of left field. And I will accept a lot of people will argue that we shouldn't fund flat earth studies. And believe me, I don't want to, but at the same token, it's academically dishonest for me to say, I am going to not fund your project just simply because I don't believe in it. Ghosts. How much evidence do we have for ghosts? Both anecdotal, go on YouTube, there's tons of videos taken from innocent situations. I can understand if somebody is filming something and something moves in the background. That's not evidence of a ghost. That's an evidence of 10,000 things you can't control for it. But in a security camera footage, that might actually show there's something there. With the planet being wired up the way it is, there's all sorts of opportunities to gather more data than we could 20 years ago. The Internet of Things, which if you've ever heard of it before, great. If not, the Internet of Things is how your cell phone connects to your home and how it controls all of the various things. It's the way your thermostat communicates with the electrical grid and tells it how much it needs to do. That's called the Internet of Things. Things communicating with each other without people actually becoming involved. But the Internet of Things could be a valuable resource for studying the paranormal. Human eyes are unfortunately human. We get tired, we get distracted, we get lazy, we start thinking, we start daydreaming, and you know what? We're not 100% vigilant. I've been a security guard, I'll tell you. Probably some things slipped by my view. Not that I was trying to goof off, but yes, sometimes you have to go to the bathroom. You have all these sort of things where you're not watching your videos. And even these great internet sleuths who managed to uncover the monolith, they're still searching. They're still going all over the place looking for things. There were islands that were marked on Google Maps that they've proven don't exist. Now, if you told anybody 10 years ago that there were going to be islands taken off the map because they didn't exist, people would have laughed at you. But it's happened twice that I know of. And there's plenty of articles on that online. You can go look it up. So a skeptic would have said, we already know the world and everything about it. Proper skeptic is looking, because you never know. It's a freaky world out there and freaky things happen. We have to keep our minds open for those insane things. Honestly, it boggles my mind. Yes, in order to move ahead as an academic, in order to move ahead, you do have to play political games. You have to toe the party line. You can't be in your boss's office shouting, I believe in UFOs and I'm going to prove it to you. It doesn't work that way, unfortunately. That being said, the most important revolutions of all time do generally come from the people. People like you and I. People who are not particularly rich. People who are shuttered in their homes because of this global shindig, let me call it. Oh, those discoveries come from us. Because we have to be the ones to say, hey, this is happening. A lot of people accuse those of us who are interested in the paranormal and conspiracies that we're just doing it for attention. We're just doing it to sell books. Okay, I have a radio show. I sell books. You know what? This does not sell any books for me. This garners a little bit of interest on the internet, on the Life Online radio network. And I'm proud to be a part of that. The same token, I'm not getting rich off of it. Nobody ever did. Patterson Gimlin, who took that footage of Bigfoot back in the 70s, took decades to get any sort of fame from that. Patterson passed away before anything could happen, and Gimlin today is still a minor character. If he walks into a UFO convention, nobody knows who he is until he says, I'm Bob Gimlin. The Maury Island incident was set up to sell books. There was a newspaper, oh my goodness, can't remember the name. It was a very interesting one. Tales of the Strange, Bizarre, something like that. I forget what it was right now. I'm kind of embarrassed about that. But they sponsored Kenneth Arnold to fly out there and investigate the Maury Island incident. Their intention was to sell more papers, but they were a schlock magazine that was just trying to make more copies go out. They were in the printing business. So their motivation, I absolutely believe, was to sell more papers. Bob Gimlin, not so much. As an author myself, I can tell you, once I commission cover art, get things edited and get them out, for the amount of time that I put in, I do not make minimum wage. And Bob Gimlin would have found the exact same thing. Books don't make you rich unless your last name is either King or Rollins. My name is neither. My name is Silverlight. And that's why I'm pointing out that there are fields of academia that are incredibly esoteric and are believed. They're still arguing whether string theory is valid. They still want to talk about if multi-dimensions are explain things. And we know there are more than one dimensions. We know there's the fourth dimension of time and the fifth of position through time. Plus we think that there are other dimensions hidden away from us. They'll believe dimensions because the mathematical model says they have to be there. But 100 years ago, their mathematical models predicted either. Either is, how do I even describe either? Either is kind of really weird particle physics. They didn't really have particles, they believed in waves, and that these waves were controlled reality. They weren't wrong, they weren't right, they just were. And that theory was disproven. Before that, they thought, well, not everybody, but a lot of scientists thought that there were spheres surrounding the Earth. There was a sphere for Jupiter, there was a sphere for Saturn, and they were able to show the planets were anchored and going around in circles. This happened for a very long time until new mathematical models came out. And the reason why those new mathematical models came out was that people were allowed to explore. People were allowed to come out and say, this is my data, these are my conclusions, here is my book. Copernicus and Galileo stood by that through their whole lives. And they went against the general thought of the day. Now, not everybody in the Middle Ages thought the world was flat. As a matter of fact, it's becoming increasingly clear that most people did not. That being said, the people at the highest levels were stifling that research. 2,500 years ago, Archimedes made a pretty decent estimate of the circumference of the world. And believe me, people have been doing that ever since. Through a number of ingenious methods. I'm not going to go into them right now. It's getting a bit late in the show. But I'm just saying, it took 2,500 years of asking the same question over and over to really overturn the flat Earth model. It took thousands of years for people to understand they were breathing air. Simple hydrogen, oxygen, methane. Is methane in there? I forget. I'm sure in a lot of places it is. Nitrogen. That's what I would try to think of. Nitrogen, carbon, oxygen. And that's what we're breathing in right now. We only use the oxygen, but the other elements are still there and they're coming into our system. That took centuries, no, millennia. Let's put it to millennia, because during that time, we went from smashing stones together to get fire to flicking a lighter or turning a knob to get fire. That's the way science goes. It progresses and it progresses into new ground. But it has this stubborn resistance to going into the paranormal. It doesn't want to look at UFOs. It doesn't want to look at ghosts. It doesn't want to look at Sasquatch. Now, there are renegade researchers out there who are trying to look at all of those things. But it's so hard for them to get funding. That's why they're always reaching out to people like you and I. If only we had the money, right? But those independent researchers who are trying to make things non-falsifiable to show that everything is up for grabs, up for questions, and that we should continue to move on. These people, unfortunately, are being lost. And we're heading towards a filter point. Don't know what's going to happen because they haven't made the announcement yet. But when this great reset comes, for the past 15, 20 years, they've been arguing that children should be studying the STEM stuff. Science, technology, math, and I forget what the E stands for. But that's what they want them studying. Science, technology, and math. So they're going to use computers to study science and do math. But there's so much more to human experience than science and math. Yes, that may get them a job, and they need the fundamentals, but you also need to study art and music, because that shows you the beauty in the world. Nobody looks at a mountain and works out the mathematical proportions and says that is beautiful. But they paint it and they say that's a beautiful painting of that mountain. We're more than just the judgments we make. We're more than the numbers that we put down on paper. We're human beings. You know what? We are worth everything that we do. So, if you believe in flat Earth, if you believe in Atlantis, if you believe in that space aliens are coming down and taking you away at night, the logical thing for me to do is to sit and listen to you. Because I might disagree with you, I might find flaws in your story, but it doesn't invalidate your personal experience and your personal opinion. It's time we get away from modern skepticism where nothing is believable and go back to classical skepticism where we ask questions. Even to the point of annoying ourselves, we need to still ask questions. Because the moment we stop asking questions, we stop discovering the world and we stop fulfilling our purpose as human beings. Wish to thank you for joining the Silverlight Show. Once again, thanks to the Life Online Radio Network for hosting the show this week and every week. Special thanks to our sponsor, Affinity WES, at Affinity WES on Twitter and Facebook. Link in the description will point you towards some books which we have. They're fun books, they're fiction books, they're just things for you to enjoy. And most importantly, we want you to keep questioning. Thank you for listening and have a great day.